There's a huge mistake 52% of us are making when it comes to magnesium, and this mistake needlessly puts us at higher risks of heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, and weakened bones. Let's go through why magnesium is critical for our health, the big mistake many of us are making, and how we should get the optimal amount of magnesium. At the end of the video, I'll share something about magnesium that blew my mind during my research. But first, even if you have a normal magnesium blood test, you may still be deficient and run into easily avoidable health issues. Let me explain. Magnesium is an essential mineral required for more than 300 enzyme systems in the body, including protein synthesis, muscle and nerve function, blood glucose control, and blood pressure regulation. It also contributes to the structural development of bone, DNA synthesis, and the production of a powerful antioxidant called glutathione. Additionally, magnesium plays a critical role in the active transport of calcium and potassium ions across cell membranes. This is vital for nerve impulse conduction, muscle contraction, and maintaining a normal heart rhythm. But here's the problem with magnesium blood tests. An adult body contains approximately 25 grams of magnesium, with 50 to 60% present in bones, and most of the rest is found in soft tissues. So less than 1% of the total magnesium is found in blood, and these levels are kept under tight control. So assessing magnesium status is difficult because most of the magnesium is inside cells or in the bone. So blood levels have little correlation with the total body magnesium levels or concentrations in specific tissues. There are other methods of assessing magnesium status, such as measuring magnesium in saliva and urine, but no single method is considered satisfactory, and this contributes to the big mistake many of us are making when it comes to magnesium intake, and we'll address that later in the video. But first, what evidence do we have that higher magnesium intake improves our health? And when reviewing this research with me, see if you can spot a huge problem that trips up many health influences. In 2010, an observational study of more than 14,000 people showed that higher magnesium intakes were associated with an almost 40% risk reduction in sudden heart death. A 2013 study, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, involving more than 300,000 people, showed that higher magnesium levels were associated with a 30% lower risk of heart disease. You can see that association quite clearly on a graph from a separate study published in the Journal of the American Heart Association in 2016. It shows that low magnesium levels are associated with a 36% higher risk of death compared to high levels of magnesium. Can you see the problem yet? I'll give you two more examples. It's not just heart disease that's linked with magnesium. Higher magnesium intakes are also associated with a lower risk of strokes, according to a 2012 study involving more than 240,000 people. Additionally, strong associations exist between magnesium and measures related to metabolic syndrome, such as blood pressure, cholesterol, blood sugar, and insulin sensitivity. For example, a 2011 study involving over 500,000 people shows that higher magnesium intakes are associated with a 22% reduction in the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. And the list goes on. Low magnesium intakes are associated with dementia, poor hearing, Parkinson's disease, depression, anxiety, and the list goes on. But have you spotted the problem with this research? It's all associations and correlations do not equal causations. So let me give you a couple of examples to drive this point home. There's a real correlation between the number of people who drowned by falling into a swimming pool and the number of films Nicolas Cage appeared in. This correlation suggests that as Nicolas Cage appears in more movies, more people will drown in swimming pools, which is obviously a coincidence with no causal link.
You making this up?
Another example is the correlation between per capita cheese consumption and the number of people who died by becoming tangled in their bed sheets. This ridiculous correlation implies that eating more cheese might somehow cause fatal bed accidents, which is clearly not the case. So when looking at this magnesium research, yes, observations are interesting, but what we really need are human randomized controlled trials. But that leads us onto the next problem. There's no money to be made by funding these large long-term magnesium studies. So all we've got are small, short-term studies that often conflict with one another. But don't worry, there is a solution which I'll go through shortly. For example, while this 2018 randomized controlled trial showed benefits from magnesium supplements for parameters of metabolic syndrome, another trial did not. This conflict of evidence extends even to well-known benefits of magnesium, such as improved sleep or treatment of muscle cramps. As Consumer Lab concludes, several small studies suggest that taking magnesium may shorten the time it takes to fall asleep in older adults with insomnia, although it does not appear to improve sleep quality or increase total sleep time. And when Cochrane performed a systematic review, they concluded that magnesium is unlikely to help with muscle cramps. What we can say at this stage is that magnesium is an essential element for our health, and higher intakes are strongly correlated with many health benefits. However, we lack the randomized controlled trials to establish a cause and effect relationship. Given these correlations, it's crucial to reach the recommended daily intake of magnesium, and that's the key takeaway. Yes, we lack the randomized controlled trials, but we should strive to reach the recommended daily intake. The trouble is, 48% of us consume less than the estimated average requirement, let alone the recommended daily intake, which for males is 420 milligrams and females is 320. Additionally, about 52% of people with high blood pressure do not consume enough magnesium. So the mistakes people make are not consuming enough magnesium and relying on a blood test to assess their levels rather than focusing on their intake. But the big mistake people make is after recognizing that their magnesium intake is likely low, they don't address it properly. Let me explain. Magnesium is found in leafy green vegetables such as spinach, legumes, nuts, seeds, and whole grains. Generally, foods containing dietary fiber provide magnesium. So yes, meat does contain some magnesium, but not as much as plant-based sources. And many of us are deficient because we're eating processed, refined foods. The magnesium is stripped away, and instead of improving the diet, many of us turn to an easy option and just buy a magnesium pill. The problem with this approach is that you miss out on all of the other benefits of a whole food diet. A supplement is just that. It should supplement an already healthy diet, not replace it. And that's the strategy that I use. I have a great diet, but it can be challenging to reach the recommended daily intake of magnesium day in and day out. So I supplement with 126 milligrams of magnesium, or 30% of the recommended daily intake. This complements a healthy diet. But just because I take a supplement does not in any way mean that you should as well. But that leads us on to the next question. Which form of magnesium is best? And there's a sneaky trick that you need to watch out for when looking at magnesium labels, and we'll cover that shortly. Starting with magnesium oxide, it's an incredibly common form because it's so cheap, but it's poorly absorbed and not the form that I use. On the other hand, magnesium citrate is also cheap and very well absorbed. It also has a laxative effect, which may be useful for some people. But before we get on to my favored forms of magnesium, we need to mention magnesium l-threonate because this form has risen to fame recently. Animal studies suggest that using magnesium l-threonate improved the memory of mice, but in humans, the results are conflicting. A small study funded by the makers of a magnesium l-threonate supplement showed a small increase in the speed of performance when performing executive tasks, while those on a placebo showed an even smaller improvement. However, there was no improvement in working memory, episodic memory, attention, anxiety, or sleep relative to the placebo. Another small study also showed conflicting results, so I'm not convinced that this expensive form of magnesium will offer any additional benefits compared to the other forms. Instead, my favored forms of magnesium are those that are bound to an amino acid, such as magnesium glycinate and magnesium taurate. These are well absorbed, and both glycine and taurine have really interesting roles to play in our health, and I've elected for magnesium taurate for reasons that I've explained in this video here. But that leads me onto a trick that you need to watch out for when reading magnesium labels, and then I'll share something that blew my mind about magnesium. The recommended daily intakes are based on elemental magnesium. So taking magnesium taurate, for example, it's only 8 to 9% elemental magnesium. So to meet the 126 elemental magnesium target that I want, I have to take over 1,500 milligrams of magnesium taurate. This is one of the reasons why the microvitamin supplement I designed has a 5-pill serving size, so that it can fit all of that material in. But again, just because I take a supplement does not in any way mean that you should as well. So be careful when you're reading magnesium labels. They should either say how much elemental magnesium is in them, or list how much of the recommended daily intake they are providing. Microvitamin, for example, shows 30% of the recommended daily intake. And here's what blew my mind when looking at the magnesium research. One of the reasons why we might have low intakes of magnesium is that magnesium used to be present in the water we consume, but much of it has now been stripped away. For example, a 2017 study in Israel showed that magnesium levels fell sharply when the water supply was switched over to desalinated seawater. It's the same for Denmark, where as magnesium concentrations in the water supply decreased, heart attacks and strokes increased. Rates of atrial fibrillation also increased as the magnesium in the drinking water decreased. In summary, our water and foods today are heavily processed and have stripped away much of the magnesium. We have to prioritize whole foods to try and get enough magnesium from our diet, and if a supplement is to be considered, it should supplement a healthy diet, not replace it. And make sure to check out this next video here that goes into a lot more detail into taurine and why I've chosen to supplement with magnesium taurate. And a massive thank you to all of the patrons supporting the channel.